And I just was going to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about the group. So I think I know a lot of you. I see a lot of very familiar faces, but I'm Melissa Fuller, and I'm representing the Friends of Tamarack Lake group, which is a group of concerned citizens that we worked with the townships, the city of Meadville, many of our representatives, and many other organizations to help get Tamarack Lake restored, which I am happy to say is almost done with construction. And the dams are almost complete, and we are looking forward to it being filled. Yay! So I've been watching the construction being done and riding my bike around, and it is just very impressive. If you haven't taken a drive around the lake and seen the construction, I would encourage everyone to do that. It's really quite impressive, and we're super excited. So really excited to see people fishing and boating and enjoying the lake again. I hope we see a lot more people out there. So I'm excited to hear about the next step, which is what we're going to hear about a little bit tonight. And just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank Jill from Westmead for letting us use the building and organizing, and Brian Polaric for organizing this meeting. So thank you very much, and I'm glad to see everyone here.
Okay. Well, my name's Paul Urbanek. I'm the Director of Engineering for the Fish and Boat Commission. Excuse me. I have, someday, if we have lots of time, we will sit down and tell stories about this lake, because I've been here ever since 2011, when we first found the boil. I was standing right there when we found it. I was there when the day we had to drain it. I've been through the whole process of design, construction. This project has taken me to Washington, D.C., to Harrisburg, to the city of Meadville for a city council vote, here in this room multiple times. Jill can attest to that. So I don't have time to explain it all tonight or tell a bunch of stories about the different people I've met, but I'm pretty happy to say now that we are, nearing the final process of construction, and we're ready to wrap this thing up. Oops. So I have a pretty simple presentation tonight. I only have about 12 slides and 3 things I'm going to go over. A little bit about the construction, like Melissa was saying. If you haven't been down there, take a look around. Please don't go into construction site because they're still working, but you're more than welcome to drive around the roads and observe from a distance. Then I'm going to go over a little bit about the refilling process, and then some of the improvements we're going to make around the lake. Just a brief background. I'm sure everybody is well aware. It was constructed in the 60s for as flood protection, primarily for the city of Meadville and the borough of Cochranton. It was funded through different partners, Soil Conservation Service, Fish and Boat Commission, East Mead, West Mead Township, County Commissioners, and I think that's it. The storage volume of the lake at normal pool is about 3,820 acre feet. So you take an acre of land, put a foot of water over it, 1 acre foot. This one has 3,820. Has a maximum depth of about 16 feet. The surface area is 550 acres. It's one of the Fish and Boat Commission's largest surface area-wise. The length of the reservoir, 3.4 miles. I don't know if I could run that far, let alone boat that far. That's probably why you'll see many access points along the lake, so people can go a distance and take the boat out or launch and come back. The drainage area is about 5 square miles. So the dam rehabilitation construction, obviously the problem with the dams was we found boils and voids along the conduit of Dam A. There was also some spillway capacity issues and some potential stability issues. The dams were constructed in the 60s, so they really just need to be brought up to current standards. The project, obviously, we rebuilt the Dam A about 140 feet upstream of the existing dam, and then we rehabilitated Dam B right in place. The construction cost was at the end, or at nearing the end, is about $9.8 million. The contractor was Thomas Construction, and currently, as of yesterday, we were about 93% complete, and that is based on what the contractor had invoiced. So as a means of payment, it was 93%.
Is Dam A on the north end?
Yes, sorry. Dam A is at the north end. It inundates, well, collectively they inundate two watersheds. Mill Run, which flows north towards Meadville, Mud Run, which flows south towards Cochranton. They inundate, there's a saddle point in the middle. They inundate and make one collectively large lake. So I just have a few photos of construction. If you didn't make it out to see it, starting with the upper left, that was probably last year around this time. They were just starting to relocate Dam A. If you're moving clockwise, the one over there in the upper right-hand corner is when they had removed the existing outlet conduit where the voids were, and you can see there's just the only thing left standing is the old control tower. If you move down here to the lower left, there is a photo of the contractor forming up the new control tower and outlet conduit. Then over there to the right, you'll see a picture of the contractors spreading the soil, the earth dam. They spread it out in like 8-inch layers. Then with the bulldozer there, they come in, dump it, and they spread it with the bulldozer. Then someone will come through with a sheep's foot vibratory compactor, and they'll compact that down. And we could talk all day about dam construction, but I won't take you there. I won't head down that hole. A few more photos. Obviously, the control tower and outlet conduit being poured. There's some other photos here you can look at. Control tower. One of the neater features about this dam is the articulated concrete blocks that are underneath the soil. And what that does is that protects the downstream side of the dam if the dam ever were to overtop during a large rainstorm. That's a layer of armoring so the dam doesn't actually erode and fail. Touchy. So here's the same process with Dam B. In the spring, obviously, they were removing it. The one over there to the right, no dam. It's actually in a pile behind it, behind the person taking that photo. Down the lower left-hand side is the same process. They formed up the outlet conduit, control tower. That took a better part of the summer for them to build. Oh. And then here's a photo of them actually laying down those mats of concrete blocks. They're all tied together with nylon rope, and then they're covered up, which you'll see over there on the right. And that's a photo of them covering up the blocks with soil.
What did you do with the 200 bags or 300 bags of sand for a ton and a half in each bag?
There's some of them are still there.
What's that for? They told me initially that was the last coat. That sand.
You talking about the big white bags? Some of those were used for as water diversions, were part of their water control. I don't think that was the same sand they were using for some of the dam features.
He didn't know because he didn't know much more about it that time than I did because he just started working there. He didn't know what the engineers.
Yeah.
But we saw six semi-trailers. One morning I took her to Meadville on 6, and they were loaded with the bricks about that long. And then they tied those together. Then they made about 30 foot long.
Yeah. The mats.
Unbelievable. I call this a hoover dam right off of that.
Yeah. A little smaller. I thought it was funny. The one day I was up there and they actually had a big pile of the sand. And this is probably about November, and I looked and there was bobcat tracks all over it. What are they doing? Oh, it's their big litter box. So on to probably why the reason everybody's here, and the more kind of important thing right now is the refilling of the dam and the refilling process. So we're not quite ready to say mission accomplished. The refilling of the dam is very critical because you're testing out all these new features, new structures. You're putting things under pressure that have never been under pressure before. You're really testing those foundation soils and the dam embankments themselves. So as this process begins and as it progresses, we are very cognizant of sending engineers out once a week, maybe once every other week, to inspect the structure, inspect the control tower, inspect the outlet works. You know, we inspect everything to make sure it is functioning as designed. One of the features that has yet to be constructed, which hopefully will happen here in March, is the contractor's going to have a series of monitoring wells drilled in the dam, and there'll actually be just a well casing that goes down in. Some will go down to the embankment, some will go down to the foundation, and those will actually have some telematics, some electronics installed that we can go up and maybe a handheld reader. We can go up and actually see how the water in the foundation and the embankment is reacting as we fill it up. The rate of refilling will depend largely on Mother Nature, the rainfall and runoff. Yeah, we hope there's not a drought, but we have to raise the lake at a controlled rate. So we don't want to take it. We don't want to fill it more than a foot or two a week, because we want to give that embankment time to saturate. We want those foundation soils to saturate nice and evenly and slowly, give everything time to adjust. And this is pretty standard procedure as we fill a lake. There are some minimum downstream flow requirements. So when we do fill it, we'll send someone out, we'll close the gate, we'll leave about an inch or two of the gate open to maintain some flow downstream. Our target refill start date is around April 15th. That will depend largely on the weather, and if the contractor can get out there, he has to set some bridges from the dam to the control towers. He's got to drill those monitoring wells. He's got to spread some topsoil and grass seed. There's still some things he has to wrap up, but we're getting close. That's our target date. Hopefully that is the date. We estimate a refill time of about 6 months. That's based on other dams about this size. Like I said, we hope there's not a drought. The fastest we could have it filled up is, I think, I'll show you on the next slide. And I already went over the engineering inspections. So this is kind of the cover sheet of the actual refill plan. We submit to DEP. DEP reviews it. DEP approves it. And until they do that, we can't start refilling. But our target date in that plan is mid-April. You'll see a schedule up there in the upper right, which shows the different elevations that we fill it to. So the maximum we go in a week is 3 feet for the first 6 feet. So 3 feet for a week, 3 feet another week, if we get that much rain. And then we'll go at 2 foot increments till we get to the top, and that'd be 1 foot. Unfortunately, if we get to 6 feet and we get a massive rainstorm and it fills it up, we actually have to let it drain back down. So we want a nice, steady progression of rain. If you think about the overall watershed, 5 square miles, surface area or storage of 3,800 square feet, 640 acres in a square mile. Without taking the weeds too much, that's about a foot, 15 inches of rain. So we need 15 inches of rain over the course of a couple months. Down here to the lower right is basically some of the things that our engineers are going to be looking for. They're going to be monitoring tow drains, monitoring seepage, monitoring the embankment, inspecting everything. So expect to see them here over the course of the next 6 months. Oh, geez. Some other improvements that we're gonna make. We're gonna spruce up the parking lots. Put a new layer of stone down, fix any potholes, evaluate the boat launch ramps, and make sure they're fresh and neat and usable. Some of the docks have been sitting here basically since we drained the lake for 7 years. We're gonna replace all those, put some new stuff in, evaluate that jetty, make sure the concrete is any slabs that need to be replaced. We can replace those. Just kind of spruce everything up and make it nice again. Also signage. Saw some of the signage was kind of old. I have questions on here, but I think we're going to wait till the end for the questions. I took up 15 minutes, I guess. So questions, wait till the end. Because I can do it too if you want. Careful, that's touchy.
I brought it. It's not that bad. First time user. Didn't use a red pointer.
No, I didn't.
That's okay. It's just a little bit. Good to go? Okay. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Melissa and Jill from the West Meadville, West Mead Township for organizing the event, having everybody here. We're excited to be here. Thank you again for everybody in attendance and taking time out of your busy evening to be with us. So we're happy to be here and inform you about Tamarack Lake. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Brian Insheim. I'm a fishery biologist. I work out of our Fisheries Management Area 2 office located in Tionesta. Little background about myself. I've been with the agency for just under 15 years and started my career in working for our fish production services, and then became a biologist and been at our office for about the past 9 years at our Area 2 office. So today the title of my talk is going to be talking about the restocking plan for Tamarack Lake. So we'll walk you through what we're going to be doing for the lake. Here's a quick overview of the specific topics that I'll be covering, specific key lake features that we'll be talking about, what made Tamarack Lake such a popular and really good fishery that it provided in there. So we'll talk about some key things about that. And then I'm going to cover, obviously, some specific details about the restocking plan, what we plan to stock, and what our progress of how we get those populations rebuilt in there. And then proposed regulations. That's going to be we're going to impose some specific regulations on that to protect those fisheries as they're being rebuilt. And then the monitoring plan. Obviously, we're going to need to go back in there and monitor that to evaluate those populations and make sure everything is progressing with that plan. And then I'll share some information about some recently restocked lakes and kind of what anglers can expect with the fishery as we continue to build it. Whoops, Paul, you were right. Okay, so what I want to share on this slide here is this is our area of responsibility. We are Area 2. If you're not familiar of how we have things set up in the state of Pennsylvania, we actually have 9 AFM areas, and each one of these areas has a fishery management office in it. Ours is located in Tionesta. We're actually at a hatchery here. Where we're located in Forest County. We cover about 13 counties. Some of our really big waters are Allegheny Reservoir at 12,000 acres. We also cover the Allegheny River. That's about 200 miles there, as well as Oil Creek and Clarion River. Talking about Tamarack Lake up here in Crawford County, we also cover the French Creek drainage. And that would be lakes that drain into the French Creek. And if you're familiar with Edinburgh and Lake Canadota and places like that, we manage that as well too. So we got a pretty sizable area. I also want to point out too that we share borders with some other offices, primarily our Area 1 office. They have an AFM office located in Lionsville. And we work together on that. 2 of those staff are here tonight. That's Tim Tim Wilson over here raising his hand, and Freeman Johns, and they're kind of my tag team partners and my helpers. And Tim has quite a bit of history with Tamarack Lake. He was up at my office before I started, so he's going to be working with me on this too. So, okay. Prior to the drawdown, the lake really provided some excellent fair to excellent opportunities for various species, specifically largemouth bass. It was really popular for panfish. That would include bluegill and crappie, and we also annually stocked it with walleye and muskie. The lake had a really good population for muskie in it. I looked at some of the historical data in there, and it had we had trap nets where we would get 20, 30 muskie in one trap net. So it's a really nice population for that as well too. But we're managing for all those species. So Paul mentioned a little bit about some characteristics about the lake. So why do we have such a nice population in there? Well, first of all, the lake is relatively shallow. Paul had 16 feet, but anywhere from 13 to 16 feet. It's a fairly shallow impoundment, and there's some nice advantages of having a shallow lake like that. Typically, these are more fertile lakes. They have a lot of productivity in them. And that votes well for excellent for fish growth. A lot of productivity, a lot of fertility, Tamarack Lake is unique in that way. Also, it has a fair amount of aquatic vegetation as well too. That's really important. Obviously, too much vegetation, that's not a good thing. That can be some hampering for trying to fish in it. But the right amount of vegetation, which it had, provides excellent cover and protection for those young fish. Also, those are areas where fish can spawn in those areas as well too, and again, the young of the year to grow. We have several lakes that the Commission owns and manages, and such as the Allegheny Reservoir. That's kind of a challenge one because it's a lake that doesn't have a lot of fertility, and it seems to affect the populations in something like that. But a nice fertile lake like this, we see some really good populations in it. Also, existing habitat features in Tamarack Lake. It has 2 dams on it, like Paul mentioned. Everybody knows that. And in the middle of it, towards the Cochranton end, it has it was never habitat limiting as far as types of structures that had in there. It has stump fields in the middle of it. It also has these rock croppings along the jetties of it and along the dam breasts. These are natural attractants for fish to already stage in those areas. Ben Page is going to be with you at some point. He's going to talk a little bit more about the habitat conditions in there and some new approaches that we're going to do with that as well too. So. Before I get into the restocking part of it and kind of the meat of the restocking plan, keep in mind that it's going to require us to dewater the lake to get rid of any other species that are in there that we don't want in there. And then once we do that, that's when we'll get into the restocking plan and start initiating some warm and cool water populations to restock in there because it won't have anything in there, so we need to rebuild these populations. We typically write a stocking plan for usually a 3-year stocking plan on this, and we'll begin to build those populations up by doing that by annual stockings. They'll primarily consist of fingerling stockings to start out, but not all of them will be fingerlings. We have some adult forage species that will be stocking in there too. One of the big things is some people mention, why don't you stock adult bass or adult fish in there? And the concern about this is they don't have any food to feed on at that time. Fingerlings, there's lots of stuff for them to feed on at that time, the zooplankton, the phytoplankton, and all that for them to feed on. So when these are the species that we're going to include in the stocking plan. These are ones that were historically in the lake that did well. They include muskie and walleye and largemouth bass and black crappie and our panfish species. And keep in mind that these species here, the largemouth bass, bluegill, and crappie, once these get to a size, they're gonna reproduce naturally in the lake, so it won't be necessary to continue to stock on those. But the muskie and the walleye, those will be annual stockings to maintain their population because they don't naturally spawn in there. What's that? You really have to put the muskie back in? It really has the right habitat for it, and you're right in the area for where we have lots of lakes with muskies in this region as well too. So we're just
growing up, we used to get out here and catch the big crappies and stuff.
Yeah.
And they used to keep the walleye population up. And then when they put the tiger muskie or the muskie in there, they kind of like disappeared.
Okay.
and that's one thing I would like to see in that lake, is keep the muskie out of there.
Okay, come see me after this, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, okay? And then the forage species that we're going to be stocking in there consist of shiners and minnows. Also, some of the adult species that I have listed down here are stocked as adults will include white suckers and golden red horse. And these are the natural species that we want in there. These are the forage species. When I say forage, these are the food resources for the game species to eat. And it's important that we get those in there and provide the food sources for that. We don't just put everything all in at once. We actually build these as we go. So it's a step-by-step process. So we'll want to establish the forage base in there first of these species. Then when we start stocking in some of these game species, they have something to eat right away when they get in there. And that includes, how this will work is we will start with the forage species. We'll get some of those in there. Hopefully initial stockings will occur this year, but it'll depend on lake conditions and what the water is at that time, as Paul has mentioned. But we'll want to stock those in there, and then we'll come back in and we'll stock some bass in there. And then the next year we'll come in and we'll stock some minnows again, some bass, and then stock some bluegill in there. And we just kind of follow up that way to build those year classes in there so they can build that fish community. Okay. Again, it depends on lake conditions. This isn't this is a very flexible stocking plan because we have to adapt to that, and especially in the early onset of the stockings. And we're hoping to get some in there this year to start out with that. Some of these forage species involve trap and transfer that are not necessarily raised in our hatchery system, so pine bitumen is an excellent source for getting some of those things. We want a nice diversity of forage species in there for the lake. So while we're rebuilding these warm and cool water populations, we want to make sure that we are protecting from harvest. And the reason for that is a lot of these fish, when they start getting to that size and they're naturally reproducing, we don't want to remove those out of there. That's part of the balancing of the fish populations, and they're part of the natural reproduction that's occurring in there. So we want to maintain that as that's going through. Keep in mind, this is a temporary regulation. This isn't permanent. And what we'll do is, catch and release is the appropriate regulations for that. We're doing that with many of our other lakes that are newly refilled, just to protect that. We want to create angling opportunities, but we want to just protect from the harvest. So depending on, this will be given to our commission board, and then pending their approval, we'll add the lake into the catch and release lakes program. We actually got in the regulation books, we have a category for that, and then they'll be listed in the summary booklet. And then we'll also work with our WCOs to get some signs posted out there so everybody's aware of what's going on. Obviously, we're rebuilding the populations. We're stocking these annually, and we're working on that. We're going to need to want to come back and do some monitoring with that to assess the development of those fisheries. And the timing of that is very flexible. We want to make sure that populations are rebuilding in there, and so some of those surveys of when we do come in will involve some night electrofishing. And what we call these are precursor or cursory surveys, or what we call checkup surveys. So we'll come in a couple years after stocking and do some night electrofishing for bass, and then do some near-shore seining. And this is to assess natural reproduction, make sure that's occurring at a good level. And then at that time, we can also make some adjustments to the restocking plan should we need to do that. Later on, we'll come in a few years later after that, and we'll want to do some intent surveys. And this is where you see on your biologist reports when we're doing trap net surveys, and we're also doing some night electrofishing. At that time, the intent survey means that we're looking at size distribution, we're looking at abundance of fish, we're looking at age and growth and those types of variables. And then at that time, we can decide, is it time for harvest at that time. And then once we make a determination on that, if we feel that it's time, then what we'll do is we'll relax the regulations on that and make an appropriate regulation on it that would be adaptable to that. Okay? And again, the regulations these aren't permanent. They're not going to be that way. With the catch and release, we'll adapt to what we have when we assess the lake. So before the refilling begins, this is really important. That we want to remove any unwanted species that are in there. One of the biggest issues that we had was common carp. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that specifically, what happened with Tamarack Lake. But this will require us to get all these fish out of there. It will require us to dewater that lake. And that involves pumps and all that. We work with our engineering department. We're working with the consultant as well, too. He's got to remove the coffer dam in there. So he's going to be dewatering this Cochranton end down here. This is the part where we're most concerned about. This is a recent picture of it, January 2nd of 2019, and it can vary between 5 to 10 acre pool in there because it just doesn't completely drain. That's why we've got to get some pumps in there and drain it all out. So we want to drain it completely and make sure we have nothing left in there, and we'll be able to assess that at that time. And if there is some fish in there by chance, we have some various sampling gear that we would use to remove those fish out of there. What we'll also do is we'll walk around the lake and make sure that we don't have any other standing pools and things like that where there might be some fish still held up in there. We want to do that and assess that. One of the biggest things that we're really concerned with is that we don't want any unauthorized stocking during that time. We're rebuilding these populations. We're laying out the stocking plan. If we follow that plan without any other of these unwanted species, such as common carp and gizzard shad, we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I do want to point that out just to make sure that, that nothing like that happens. I'm specifically mentioning common carp. Why no common carp? Well, there some little background on the common carp. They're actually an exotic species. They're not from Pennsylvania. They're native to Asia and parts of Europe. And it seems like once they got in here, it seems like they're in most of our lakes. And it's not by us stocking them. We don't propagate this and we don't stock it, but we have it. The biggest thing about carp is that they produce negative ecological impacts they basically disrupt the fish community. And they have big effects on the game species that we are trying to manage. They can really explode in there and get going, and unfortunately the game species lose out in that battle. There was 2 major cause and effects incidences that happened in Tamarack Lake. I was in the last refill in 1999. There was a remnant carp population, and it was left over when we had filled up the lake. We were not aware of that, and we did our best to get everything out of there, but apparently there was still some left in there, and they just took off. And there wasn't any predators to control them. We were getting our stockings in there with of our fish, but there was nothing to control their population. So they got a spawn in there, and they were spawning and recruiting in there in high numbers before we even got our stockings going. The second thing is a lack of largemouth bass stockings. In the first couple years when we requested the largemouth bass, we didn't get the numbers that we needed to have in there, and we were stocking some bluegill roughly about that same time. And the importance of largemouth bass to the panfish is that they help control the population. So if you don't have enough bass in there that's controlling the panfish are just going crazy in there, and you got a whole bunch of stunted little panfish in there. You don't have enough bass or predators to control them. So those are 2 big incidences that happened at Tamarack Lake. These are not birds. These are actually dead carp. We didn't realize the vast amount of carp that were left in that lake during that time, during the drawdown. We never got the lake back into balance. We tried to do the very best we can to get it back into balance to control the carp population, but that kind of plagued us through until that 2012, and we didn't know the majority of how many fish were left in there. If you thought this was a lot here, there's probably 2 to 3 times more at the other end. So this is your carrying capacity that was happening in the lake, and it was knocking down, it was holding back the other game species that we were trying to manage in there. So needless to say, the bottom line down here, the last one, we want to do everything possible to make sure they're not in there when we refill that lake. That is a big priority with us. So I'm talking about unwanted species, carp specifically. And again, most important, let us handle the stocking efforts. It sounds a little simple, but you would be surprised at people. They have a lake and they want to put a special species in there because they want to go catch that thing. It happens, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen in here. There's a reason why we have the plan, the reason why we're stocking these fish, because they do well in there. And these are the species of interest of our hangers that like to fish for them. So unwanted species, whether they were, most of these either started intentionally or unintentionally. And the biggest issue is once they get established and they get reproduction in there, they're impossible to eradicate. The carp, for instance, we were never going to get around that one. That was going to be really challenging to continue with that. I have listed here of several lakes with unwanted introduced species. These were never stocked by us, but they showed up. gizzard shad in Lake Wilhelm. We are having a major issue in there right now. They ended up in there, and you know, we still haven't seen the carrying capacity with that. We haven't seen the tipping point of that population. Northern snakeheads over in Philadelphia area. White perch is a big one. Edinburgh Lake. They're also in LaBeouf Lake as well too, in good numbers. Round gobies. I think we're all familiar with those and how they ended up in Lake Erie through the ballast ships and discharges and all that. It's not just fish, but it's also mussels. And Lake Erie as well too, and now Conneaut Creek. Hydrilla, it's not just it's not just fish, it's not just mussels, but it's also plants. Hydrilla is a big one. Brian's going to talk a little bit about that. They're spending about $500,000 in controlling that plant species, and it's not a fish-loving plant, and it's one of those plants just like fish where it takes over, and you got to control it. So what can we do as anglers? What are some things that we can do to keep this stuff staying where it's at and we don't pass it around? For bait buckets, we want to make sure if you're fishing Lake Wilhelm and you're using some of the fish there to catch some of the fish that are in there, you know, take that stuff with you. Discard it, get rid of it. That's the best policy. Certainly don't bring it with you and go fish Edinburgh Lake and then start fishing with that, and then at the end of the day you dump it in there. That's how a lot of this stuff gets started, and we might just want to educate the public about that and make sure we're doing our part to help control that. It's really a big issue. I hope that's kind of a driving force out of some of these slides here. The next thing is clean your gear. You know, you're in Pymatuming, you know, you have a trailer, you have a boat, you have a prop and all that, and the stuff gets caught up on there. And then you decide, hey, you know what, we're blowing off of Pymatuming, let's run over to Pymatuming Lake. Head over to Edinburgh Lake. You know, it doesn't take much for that stuff to get started. A little seed pod, things like that. So we want to make sure we're cleaning our stuff, we're doing our best for biosecurity and preventing this stuff from happening. It's tough to see on here, but we actually have a website devoted to that, and it walk you right through of all the stuff that you can do. You know, Fish and Boat Commission spends millions of dollars on this stuff to educate the public to try to keep the stuff where it should stay. Okay. So recent stocking success. I want to share with you. You know, anglers in the room are asking, just like me, how long is it going to be before we see a fishery? You know, how long is this going to take? It doesn't take long for these populations to rebuild. We often see what we call this new lake effect, where we see excellent growth rates when we first put fish in there. Why is that? Because they're not competing with anything at that time. There's lots of resources in there. The new lake effect, actually fish are a proponent in that, and actually they help the eutrophication process, where you have a lot of nutrients in the soil and the plants are taking up some of the nutrients, and fish come in and they actually release those nutrients within the lake itself. So it helps the fertility of the lake. Fish are a big component of that. The first 2 years of our, what anglers might see, the first 2 years of our stocking efforts following the plan, is you might see, it's quite possible you'll see bass up to 10 to 12 inches in size, and you'll also see panfish up to 7 inches in size. So I listed a few lakes here that have been recently refilled the past couple years, and they went in and have done some surveys in there, and these are some of the results. These are actually pictures from those lakes. Glade Run Lake is in Tim's area over there, and they did a survey and they found some nice bass populations in there. So keep in mind, some of these lakes also have some water quality issues in them, so they're not as fertile as Tamarack Lake, and they're still getting excellent growth rates and sizable populations, so we fully expect that to happen in Tamarack Lake. Finally, I'll end with this slide. Absolutely the future. I mean, the future is bright. You know, I know it's been a 7-year period. It's been a long time. We had some delays, but it's important that we get this thing built right, because we don't ever want another drawdown in this lake. So we're going to be rebuilding those populations. There's going to people who live around the local community and their lake. You're going to look out and you're going to have water back there. So, you know, it's all a good thing. It's all good news. So. With that, thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the very end. So.
All right, I'm kind of the oddball in the presentation series. My name is Brian Pilarczyk. I'm the watershed specialist for the Crawford County Conservation District. In addition to that, I'm wearing a second hat today. I'm also the past president for the Pennsylvania Lake Management Society. So for 7 years now, I think I've been promising Melissa and Jill that once the lake was finally going to be refilled, I'd talk to you a little bit more about what can be done once the lake is refilled by the community. What kind of role does the community actually play in Tamarack Reservoir? I've been with the Conservation District now for 19 years. I've seen a lot of watershed and lake associations come and go throughout the years. The Friends of Tamarack started like a lot of lake associations do, or watershed associations. They started around an issue, and the issue was that lakes being drained and refilling those lakes. A lot of associations don't survive that, or don't know how to make the transition once the lake is refilled. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that today, and what kind of things that you can do as an association. So I'll see if I can.
Okay.
Where are we at?
It should be this one.
So there we go. All right, good deal. All right, so the lake is about to be refilled. Nobody's handed you an owner's manual for it yet, have they? It doesn't come with that. It is coming with a restocking plan. It is coming with a plan for refilling. While it seems like this is the end of the process, it really is just the beginning. This is the beginning of the reservoir. This is the beginning of your new reservoir that you do have out there. Well-managed reservoirs do include a good local component. You want to have a good local community effort and strong local involvement. The various agencies that are involved in this project, Fish and Boat Commission, DEP, my office, we can't be there every day looking to see what the changes are. Brian outlined some of the sampling plans that are involved. Paul outlined some of the sampling plans that are involved. There aren't staff out there every day looking to see what's potentially coming in. Some of those invasive species that Brian had mentioned, when those do show up, it could take a while for somebody to notice that. The community has eyes on the ground on almost a daily basis, in most cases on a daily basis. The fishermen are out there on a constant basis. You're the ones that are seeing things first, and that local community involvement sometimes knows what they're looking at, sometimes doesn't know what they're looking at, sometimes sees changes and doesn't understand don't understand what those changes really mean. So that's, it is touchy. Well, that's not working.
There you go.
Can you get back to
Yeah. If you want me to do that slide, I'll do that. I told you it's touchy.
It is touchy. Here we go.
Right and back, just barely touch it.
Just barely touch it.
Right
Okay.
in the middle of it.
Got it. I've only been doing this for about 20 years now. So.
Paul said it was touchy, apparently it's touchy.
All right, so what can we do locally? First of all, it is a Fish and Boat Commission reservoir, and with that, Fish and Boat Commission has ownership. Anything that you do want to do in and around the reservoir, you first have to have permission to do that. You can't just go in and do what you want with the reservoir. There is the continuation of the Friends group. It's an evolution of that group, whether or not you evolve from trying to get the dams reestablished to a group that's there to help with the process of rebuilding the reservoir. Continuing that annual litter cleanup. It's an annual thing now that Sue comes in and borrows buckets and gloves from the Conservation District to conduct that cleanup. It was a great way to stay involved with the reservoir, even though the reservoir wasn't technically there. It was a dry basin, but it was a good way to stay involved and keep things going, keep interest up. So I think that's something that, as good stewards, continuing into the future. And then also being locally prepared for problems, or better yet, preventing those problems from ever happening in the first place. I said you're the eyes and ears of the reservoir, making sure that water quality related problems, if they're showing up, that you're prepared for what happens when those do show up, or better yet, trying to prevent pollution from entering the reservoir in the first place. Invasive species, you can be a first line of defense of trying to make sure that those don't enter the reservoir. And then watching for problems when they do show up. Around the state, there are different programs that lake associations and reservoir associations participate in. One of those is a plant watch. Knowing what the plants look like, being able to identify aquatic plants, knowing what's good, knowing what's not good, knowing when something shows up immediately, and then being able to notify the appropriate authority to be able to try to handle that situation when it comes up. So there's a potential for plant watch groups. If you've been to Pymatuning Reservoir over the last 3 years, you probably went through the Launch Steward program at Pymatuning. It's a pilot program where they have interns that actually check your boat for invasive species as they're coming into the reservoir, checking to make sure you're not carrying something into Pymatuning or back out of it in the case of hydrilla, and making sure it doesn't go somewhere else. So that's another potential. So how would you get started? Whether or not you're formalizing the Friends of Tamarack as a lake association and trying to move in that direction, or not having a formal organization, just having a group that's able to communicate to each other. A strong group normally includes participation from the local municipalities, community members, interest groups, whether that's fishing, kayaking, specific land use, maybe it's agriculture in this case, or something along those lines if industry was in the area. And also resource agencies are important to keep involved in that, whether it's the Conservation District, Fish and Boat, DEP, or even the Visitors Bureau. Having all those organizations together, working together, is going to make your group a lot stronger than trying to do it on your own as just the community or just a municipality. You've really got to have all those different interest groups in the process to make sure that you are moving in the right direction. Everybody's on the same page. So how do successful lake and reservoir associations operate? And I said I've been with the district for almost 20 years now. Statewide, I've been with the Pennsylvania Lake Management Society for almost that long. Across the state, normally what I see is that if you have groups that are mandated to start or that are being propped up by an agency or a municipality or something along those lines, they don't tend to make it. It has to be a community-led organization. It has to come from within the community and then be supported by the agencies, supported by the municipality. That's how these organizations generally, that's how they have longevity. The ones that have been around a long time. The Pymatuning Lake Association locally is a good example of that. Pymatuning Lake Association has been around since the 1940s. They are a community-led organization that has support from DCNR, from the district, from Fish and Boat Commission, from ODN, or Ohio Department of Natural Resources. They have support from those agencies, but they are not led by those agencies. They're able to come up with funding, they're able to put things on the ground, and they're an organization that's had longevity over the years. So working with the responsible entity, not against it. Fish and Boat Commission is the responsible entity. As long as your organization is working with the owner, you're going to be a whole lot better off than trying to work against the owner. Not operating in a vacuum. What I said earlier about having all of those different interest groups in place is really important. You need to make sure that you have all those groups in place so that you're not trying to come up with a plan that doesn't involve everybody that may have a stake in the reservoir. The reservoir has a lot of interest groups. There's a lot of different varied interests in it, whether or not you're a property owner, you're a fisherman or a fisherwoman, whether or not you're kayaking, depends on what your interest is in the area, bird watching or whatever it happens to be. You all have a stake in that. Have a desire to learn about the lake and what actually makes it tick. This is a really important one as well. Making sure that you're understanding the processes that are behind the reservoir. Reservoirs and lakes, they go through cycles. They have different things that happen to them. Outside forces act upon them, and knowing what you're looking at and what you think you're looking at versus what is actually happening. Don't assume that somebody else is going to do it. I think you all went through this process.
About a third. I see it. That about a third. Who about more? I'm sorry, that's not right.
But we'll get to some questions here in just a little bit. So, but don't assume that somebody else is going to get to something when you do see it. If you see an invasive species show up, don't assume that somebody else has already noticed it. Make sure that you're talking together. I think you all learned through the process of trying to get the reservoir back up and running, of having the Friends of Tamarack in the first place, that you didn't assume somebody else was going to do it. You took matters into your own hands and tried to ensure that the process did get moved through, taking local ownership of the project and trying to move that through. And then don't fall victim to the rumors. Everybody has an opinion, but make sure that you know the difference between opinion and fact. It's always good to fact check. Anytime you talk to somebody about something, sometimes it sounds like somebody knows what they're talking about. Make sure that you're checking those facts. Nothing will derail a project faster than side conversations between folks that don't know all the facts. So make sure that you are fact checking. All right, so what else can you do? One thing I've talked to Jill and Melissa about in the past is a potential for a speaker series. I mentioned earlier that learning what it takes to make that reservoir tick, what's happening in the reservoir, why is it happening in the reservoir. The more you can learn about the processes, the more you can learn about the reservoir itself, the more you can learn about the water quality issues that could be out there, the better prepared you're going to be for things that come along in the future. And that's something that I can help you with. We have different talks that we can pull in speakers from various expertise, whether it's Lake and Reservoir 101, lake ecology, learning about what makes a lake operate. Aquatic plant identification, I do a talk on aquatic plant ID, invasive species. That launch steward program I talked about. Ben Page from Fish and Boat Commission has talked about coming out and doing a habitat management talk if you're interested. Stormwater management, making sure that we're trying to keep that new reservoir as clean and healthy as possible. A project that I worked with Pymatuning State Park on at Pymatuning was invasive species disposal stations. Brian talked a little bit about the importance of making sure that we don't have invasive species entering the reservoir. He also talked about bait bucket introductions. So somebody taking bait, and if you've ever fished, whether you bought bait or whether you've caught your own bait, you know that other things end up in there besides the minnows that you purchased, whether it's small catfish or whatever it happens to be. Some of those can be pretty damaging. One of the things that we've seen the invasive species disposal stations used for at Pymatuning is for disposing of your bait afterwards. Sounds cruel to euthanize the bait afterwards if you're not going to use it, but if you think about the ramifications of releasing an invasive species, say gizzard shad like Brian mentioned, whether it's big head carp or another species, you could decimate the fish population in your lake by releasing bait fish into the lake. So whether you purchase them or whether you caught them from somewhere, this is a way to dispose of them if you're not going to use them, or if you can transfer them off to somebody else that's going to fish with them the next day. The disposal stations are also set for when you pull your boat out of the launch. If there's weeds hanging off of it, you can put those into it. The idea is it desiccates the weeds or dries them out, and you're able to dispose of those weeds. If there's something hanging on your boat, when you get to the lake, you can pull it off and you dispose of it in that disposal station. That project was actually an Eagle Scout project. Ohio Department of Natural Resources, their fisheries biologist had an Eagle Scout that wanted to do a project. We installed 16 of these both on the Pennsylvania and Ohio side. There's one at every boat launch on Pymatuning Reservoir now. And they are used regularly. I see whether it's weeds or whether it's bait fish in these on a regular basis. Pennsylvania's Lakes Awareness Month. How many people knew that? We had one. So it is Lakes Awareness Month. Every year, the Pennsylvania Lake Management Society petitions the governor to declare Lakes Awareness Month, and it's in recognition of National Lake Awareness Month within all the United States. So it's a month that we can celebrate our lakes. It's a good time to host an event, bring people out to the lake, whether you're going to have a kayaking event, you could do litter cleanups, promote the reservoir. There are a number of different ways that you can promote the reservoir through Lakes Awareness Month. So don't forget July. July is Lakes Awareness Month. So why should we continue to become involved locally? There's agencies that are watching over the reservoir. There's people that are out there. I said earlier, and I'll reiterate it, that as agencies, we can't be out there every day. We can't be there and looking at all 562 acres of Tamarack Reservoir on a daily basis. It's just not feasible. You saw how large the fisheries area 2 is. I have responsibility for all of Crawford County. We need your help to be able to watch for things that could potentially be problems and be able to report those to the right people. In most cases, if you find a problem early, it's easier to fix than if you find a problem late. So if you wait 5 years after hydrilla shows up and nobody noticed it, you probably got a real problem. If you find it the year that it's introduced and it's in a small patch, you can probably manage it. So there's advantages to having people watching, knowing what they're looking at, and I think that's the most important thing, is knowing what you're looking at, knowing when you see a problem, knowing when to contact somebody. Local entity or association sometimes can bring resources that an agency can't. Sometimes a local association can apply for grants that agencies aren't available or able to apply for. Manpower, volunteer manpower, things of that nature. So a lot of times an organization is able to mobilize and bring resources that our agencies just don't have or need to complete a project. And most importantly, your recreation potential and your property values really depend on it. There are countless studies out there that show the more invasive species that you have within a lake, the lower your property values are. The lower the water clarity is in a lake, the lower your property values are. So it's directly tied. The condition of the lake is directly tied to your property values, your recreation potential, the economy in general.
So if we want to sell our property and we want the lake up, we'll put a hose in it, right?
Talk to Paul. See what his thoughts are on that. I think that'll take a while. Better let Mother Nature take care of it. So, so what are some threats in the area? Brian mentioned hydrilla. Hydrilla is over at Pymatuning Reservoir. I've been working with the folks at Pymatuning for a number of years now to try to address it. This is one of those situations where we did get on it too late. It was identified in 2010. It wasn't until 2014 that treatment started, and it was really an unfamiliarity with the plant itself. Aquatic plants are not all built the same. You look at it and you think it's seaweed, right? They're not. They don't all have the same potential for habitat. They don't all have the same potential to be treated or managed. Hydrilla is kind of a special nut. Paul mentioned that 16-foot maximum depth. Hydrilla can grow up to 30 feet in depth. Tamarack Reservoir, if you had hydrilla and you left it unchecked, it would probably, the entire reservoir would look like that picture. So that, it's not going to be very conducive to fishing. So being aware of when it does show up, if it does show up, and then being prepared for what to do if it shows up. It's not an easy one to manage. You can't manage it by drawdowns. It's one that you have specialized techniques that you use to manage it. Phragmites, there's Phragmites in the basin right now. That's the picture on the right on the top. There's a potential when the lake's filled that Phragmites could pop up on the shorelines. Being aware as a homeowner, if you see this pop up, that it's not a good thing. It initially it looks kind of neat, and then it ends up in a dense monoculture like you're seeing there. Harmful algal blooms. These are becoming more and more prevalent as we see warming of our lakes. We're also seeing more phosphorus added to the lakes. Brian mentioned about productivity in the lake. It's a shallow lake. There's a lot of nutrients. It's very productive. There's a limit to that, though. You can be too productive. You have too much phosphorus. You push the tipping point too far, and you switch from green algae, which is beneficial to your fishery, to blue-green algae, which can end up becoming a toxic algae. Does anybody remember the Toledo water crisis from a couple of years ago? Toxic algal bloom, blue-green algal bloom, floated into or developed around the water supply for the city of Toledo, and almost 500,000 people were without water because of it. So it is a real possibility, and knowing what to look for, knowing when to contact an agency and say, I think I see something wrong. Stormwater is a prime way that phosphorus ends up in the lakes. Making sure that, especially with the reservoir like Tamarack, anytime you have a lake or a reservoir, it's an attractor for development. Everybody wants to live around a lake. They want to live around a reservoir. You have to make sure that you're smart about how you develop around a lake or a reservoir so that you're not creating problems. Probably the number one problem that I see in lake communities is the amount of stormwater that's entering the lake. If you build too densely, if you build without purpose, and you're not thinking about where the stormwater is going, you end up with flooding issues. You end up with phosphorus in the reservoir. You end up with sediment in the reservoir. You already have a shallow reservoir. You don't want to fill it in with sediment. So stormwater is another one of those threats that you have to make sure that you're watching out for. So what's out there for assistance? So as far as assistance goes, we do have the Pennsylvania Lake Management Society. It's a clearinghouse for lake management professionals and associations. We do have a mini grant program that comes off and on. It's funded by the Department of Environmental Protection Growing Greener program, and it's to allow for small projects on lakes and reservoirs, whether it's shoreline stabilization, invasive species control, nutrient inactivation, those types of things. There is the Seesaw program, which is the Consortium for Scientific Assistance to Watersheds. It's a Pennsylvania-based program, and it's to support watershed associations. In particular, Palms has a portion of that, which is geared towards lake associations. It's an easy application. It's a one-page application. The funding can be used for doing outreach events, handout materials, training. So if you did want training on aquatic plant identification, or you wanted to be trained on water quality monitoring, or you wanted to be trained on something related to lake and reservoir management, the Seesaw program can fund that. It's really underutilized in the Commonwealth right now, so being able to tap into that is important. The Mid-Atlantic Panel on Aquatic Invasive Species, they have funding for small projects. Those launch stewards at Pymatuning, the startup money for that came from the Mid-Atlantic Panel. Those invasive species disposal stations, while it was an Eagle Scout project, the funding for the materials came from the Mid-Atlantic Panel funding. So there's startup funding for projects like that. And then also there's a Department of Environmental Protection, the Growing Greener program. These are more for large-scale projects, whether you have stormwater management projects within a municipality, you're looking at trying to do stream bank stabilizations, things of that nature. If it's water quality improvements, DEP Growing Greener is a funding source that can be tapped into as well. There we go. And I'll put in a plug for the upcoming Pennsylvania Lake Management Society Annual Conference. It's the largest gathering of lake and reservoir management stakeholders in Pennsylvania. We have professionals, agencies, lake associations, municipalities, state government, academics. Topics include things like plant management, fisheries, algae management, water quality, harmful algal blooms, habitat improvement. Our theme this year is harmful algal blooms. This is the 29th year for it to be held in State College, March 6th and 7th. This is really, if you are looking at forming a Lake and Reservoir Association, this is another way for you to meet with other folks that are doing the same thing around the Commonwealth. Lake and reservoir associations are more common in the Northeast Pennsylvania than they are in the Northwest Pennsylvania. We have a handful here, but there are a ton of them out in the Northeast portion of the state, in the Poconos, where most of the natural lakes are. So there's other people like you out there that are doing similar things to what you're doing. It's an opportunity to meet those folks as well as meet the professionals that are working on these lake and reservoir management projects. So it's a good opportunity to get the latest science that's out there as far as lake and reservoir management. And with that, I'll end my program. I do want to thank Jill for hosting us here at Westmead Township. It was wonderful to be able to pull this together. And then Liz, I've been promising you this for 7 years now. I kept saying it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. We're finally getting the reservoir back. We're able to do things like this. This is a little bit more fun to have talks like this where we're actually talking about refilling the process, the fisheries that are going in there. What are some other options for really becoming involved in the reservoir? It's really up to you whether or not you get involved and become a reservoir association, a lake association. I can help support that. What I will say is that if it's something that's driven by an agency, driven by a mandate, it's not going to work. If it's something that the community wants to do and the community drives it and they look for the resource professionals to come in and move this along, it's going to go a whole lot better. So the ball's in your court as far as that goes. Jill and I talked about doing some more potential talks, so maybe we'll discuss that more and see how we can pull that on. With that, I guess you've got our attention for a little while here for some questions, and we can answer those as they come up.
Can I ask the second gentleman that spoke? I wanted to ask about the turtles.
Okay.
When it became a lake, first of all, how did the turtles get there, or did you bring them in, or about the being able for the turtles?
Wow, I'm the fish guy, not the turtle guy. You got me there.
Tamarack used to be a swamp years ago.
Yeah, sure. It's really low gradient in there. It's you look out there now and you still have standing pools and things like that. It's very low gradient, so
Right.
yeah, absolutely. And those migrate from other areas. They'll leave, and they'll go to other lakes and they'll come back in there, and we have water again, so they'll be around there. It's not an issue there. Let me close this.
Somebody said that you didn't want walleyes in there.
No, musky.
For muskie.
Muskie is what you mentioned, yeah. Yeah.
How do you keep them out?
How do I keep the muskie out?
Not putting it.
Yeah. Once we start, we're pretty committed to it. So, yeah, I understand it. What are your specific concerns about the muskie themselves? Because they were always in there.
Years ago, we used to go down there and fish for the crappies and bluegills and the big crappies.
Sure.
And then it wasn't long afterwards, they cut down on the walleye population and they started putting them tiger muskie in there.
Just pure beds is all we're putting in there, but yeah.
Yeah, but when they put them in there, it seems like they really attacked them large crappies.
Okay, what I can tell you about muskie is that we don't put muskie in there to control the panfish populations because they don't consume them. They eat some of them, but they're not a major predator of them. Those white suckers that I mentioned about, as well as the golden red horse, those are the fish that those offspring are the ones that muskies really like. Muskies, if you look at a muskie's diet, they like a soft ray fish. They'll eat whatever they need to eat, to maintain, but they're not a big consumer of panfish. I'll let Tim follow up on a little bit of that too.
I worked in Tamarack Lake years ago, and the problem with the crappies was not the muskie. The problem with the crappies was the lack of bass. We were getting 8-inch crappie that were 4 and 5 years old.
That's on the second fill.
Yeah, the second fill.
The first, I'm talking way back.
You're talking before the first
yeah.
one. You thought there was an issue in there.
Yeah.
Huh, because I thought the population, when we look at the data and all that, not saying what you're saying is not didn't happen.
Because I understand where he's coming from, because I was down here and catching them, and they were stunted like.
Yes.
Yeah, and that was after they restocked it the second time.
Almost all the crayfish were stunted. The
Yeah.
bluegills, the crappies, the
And then they just started to grow nice when you guys, before you drained it the second time.
Yeah.
But the first time I'm talking about, I was just a little kid. Right
Sure,
there,
absolutely.
And that seems like when they put the musky stuff in there, that's when the crappies just what the heck.
Maybe it was a coincidence in that, but again, what Tim's mentioning, that it was the muskie are not a big consumer of panfish in there. They kind of got their own feeding niche, and they feed on different species in there, primarily those soft-rayed species in there. So we don't expect to have a hard crash of those.
Yeah.
We had a carp problem. I know this was before that big carp problem. But
They actually prefer carp. Big muskies eat big fish. And, when we catch them in our nets, they regularly regurgitate 15, 18, 20-inch carp, white suckers, big 18, 20-inch gizzard shad. It's not effective for them to spend all their time chasing around small crappies. So really, in fact, we don't use them to control panfish because they're not an effective control. If I had to guess what was before the last, back in 99 and prior, I would probably suggest angler harvest was probably more of a driving force than the muskie predation. Harvest was pretty high, pretty intense, and that may have had more to do with the lack of large crappie than anything else.
Thank you for your mentioning all that. And
One more thing. You didn't put any channel cat or bullheads in that?
nothing in there right now with that. We want to kind of manage these populations in there, get these. These are the most preferred ones that fishermen like to fish for. Not saying they're not important, but there's some studies out with starting out with brown bullheads or channel catfish right away. They may cause an imbalance in the population, and it's best to stock those at a later time. Not saying we won't do that, but we'd like to get this stuff started first, and then, like I said, the plan is very flexible, and especially a lot of times, and that's probably 4 or 5 years down the road, once we get this really going, and they're managed, or maintain those populations, that's something we would consider. We'll also speak to anglers too, and maybe if that's something they want in there, we can certainly investigate that as well too. We didn't have them in there.
One more thing is when you're stocking these fish,
Sure.
are you taking and putting them on the east side of the lake, not just at the boat docks?
We asked in a lake like this, 560-acre lake, that we spread those around. Fish will move. I mean, if we put them one end, they'll move. They'll go find the habitat they want to be at. But and that's why we're really concerned about where the water level will be. We want to have that connectivity at both of those ends so fish can move all around in the lake and not be just trapped in one area. There are certain habitat preferences that these fish have, and we want to make that available to all, to that be available in the entire lake with the right amount of water level in there. So, but we have them stocked around in multiple points around there.
Like the east side is all woods,
Yeah.
And you get to the middle to that, you have to bring in a boat or something like that.
But the good news is at least we got a lot of accesses in there.
It's
So.
not going to be very deep in the middle, is it?
It's not. It's going to be deeper on obviously on the dam that's there. And the most deepest on the Concord Dam. So. If these are all fish questions, I'll stay up here. We got other guys too, so.
I got one.
Sure, go ahead in the back here.
This is my first meeting, so maybe this was brought up.
Okay.
I'll bring it up second. But first of all, to the last gentleman,
Sure.
a friend of mine and I were canoeing down French Creek, and in around Benango, the borough of Benango, we came across the professor and all these Allegheny students out there with masks and strings. They're looking at weeds and all kinds of things. Would it be possible maybe to make a connection with them and get them to help out, checking out water quality and stuff with, through them?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they could help anyways, and they might be glad to do it. So.
And
that's just an idea.
Sure.
And my second one, and this is kind of like closing the barn door after the horse is out, I think, but out at Erie Wildlife, when they built some of their bigger ponds, they created islands. And I figure it's probably for habitat for the birds and that.
Mm-hmm.
But not only that, in some of them you're allowed to fish in. When the weeds come up, you still can fish because it's deeper around those islands. Has any thought been brought about doing that out of Tamarack? I mean, it's a little late, but and maybe the soil isn't compatible for doing that. But it would, to me, that would be kind of neat to have islands and
Sure.
deeper spots and habitat. So.
There's different ways to handle habitat. We're hopeful to have Ben Page. He's the habitat manager for Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. Slated to come out at some point here and do a talk similar to what we did today to be able to address some of those types of questions. And I think he could handle some of the habitat questions a lot better because there's a lot of different ways that you can handle habitat.
It also created fishing.
Sure.
When the weeds started coming up, you still had a place.
Yeah.
You could look out there and say, man, you can still fish.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
The great thing about Tamarack is how many stumps are out there.
There's going to be a ton of habitat in there. It's never been limiting. There are times when I remember being out there sampling, And you really had to watch where you were going because there were actually logs throughout the lake too, because when the lake would flood up a little bit, they would flood up the shorelines and then the logs would float into the lake, and so we almost lost a boat motor one time. So
I think those will start floating when you, I mean, they've been dry for quite
well, it depends
a
on
while.
how anchored they were before the lake, when the lake went down. They may be so recessed and buried in there that you won't have a lot of that. It's hard to say. Tim, you had a comment way over there too.
When we refilled Glade Run Lake, the local Glade Run Lake Conservancy wanted an island. The Fish Commission does not build islands. Fish and Boat Commission does not build islands. So their lake association took it upon themselves to hire a contractor, move soil around the lake bed to create an island. It's not something we do. It would be something you do. As far as fish habitat, for us, you're just actually creating less surface acres
But you
by
would need-
turning some into dry land.
You would
So-
need all kinds of permits to do something like that. right?
Yes.
Yes.
There you go. So,
Yeah, you're really pushing the limit for time there.
Yeah.
That was a Glade Run. That was a process that started basically when we drained it, and they had the funding to do it, and the contractor, they were able to negotiate a fee with the contractor who built the dams.
So this should have been brought up years ago.
Yeah,
You probably wouldn't have had the funding to do
yeah,
it.
it was.
I still feel bad, I don't think it was something missed. I think
We got any more quick ones?
Longer.
A
Wherever you wanna
question
go.
on the north end barn. Is that barn gonna stay there, or you gonna keep it?
The barn's gonna stay as long as it stands. It'll stay. Yeah.
You got to put a roof on it, are you?
Yeah, it needs a roof. I can't say we're gonna put one on it, but yeah.
That's an
It needs-
artifact.
definitely
You
needs a
can't
roof.
get rid of that.
It's historic at this point.
Yeah, historic. There you go.
Another thing, on the other side of the lake, on this side of the lake, you did an awful lot of work up in the hill. Is that to get dirt, or what?
Yeah, that was the borrow area. So they cleared all the trees off, moved some soil around. That's what they used for some of the soil for the dams.
I couldn't figure out, my neighbor and I were going nuts. He's an engineer, and he couldn't get down and look at anything.
Yeah.
The first time I was in there, I questioned the guy, the first day they were there, I was out there. I questioned the guy doing the work there, and he looked down, he said, "You're supposed to have a hard hat on." And I said, "Well, I saw that, but I've lived here 50 years, I thought I was old enough I could." Then right away, the next day you had signs all over, no.
Yeah.
I look up the dictionary to see where I was, I was there.
Let's take one in the back over here. I'd give the guys on the side a two.
I
Go
just
ahead.
want to know if there are going to be some more brochures out, or if there's some now.
There are on the back table back there. There's a number of different handouts.
And
Okay.
I don't know if we mentioned too, we're going to try to get this, we'll try to get these presentations on our website too. So that way, if we kind of ran through something and you didn't get all the information on it, or you got some questions about it, we'll have some contacts on there, and we'll have the presentations posted so you can take a look at it as well too, and any follow-up with that. So, yeah.
You think we're going to be able to control the weeds that are on Tamarack? I lived there for many years.
Yeah.
Usually I had a gate store on there. And,
Right.
And by July, middle, there were times you couldn't get on that lake. And I know in the beginning it's not going to be a problem,
Right.
but it will be a problem eventually. I know when they filled it the second time, since I've lived there,
Right.
that we didn't have that problem, seems like, towards the end when they drained it the last time. What was the difference from the 90s, where it was like from 93, 92, 90 on to when they drained it, July, you were done. You were done fishing, unless you carved holes in it.
I guess
And the second time, what was done different that we?
I don't know how true this is, the comments, but usually what happens is these lakes get a lot shallower over that time. We didn't spend a lot of time in the middle of the lake excavating it and doing all that. So it's been that historical, when it was built back in '63, that's the way that's been. Now, obviously, the ends have been handled that way and they've gotten deeper. Depth is a big proponent of cutting down on your algae. Stuff that is about 4 feet deep, you don't have a lot of that vegetation during that time, especially in the inland, like the aquatic vegetation that's in the lake. But over time, that stuff does fill in over time, and then it gets shallower, and you can have more plant growth happening in that with, photozone and all that. Tim, you got a question? You got a comment too?
It was basically 40 years of unchecked it was Eurasian water milfoil, and it was just unchecked growth. So it just got worse and worse and worse over the course of about 35 years since the first. And so it basically, the lake wasn't up long enough the second time for it to get nearly as bad as it was the first time. So if we hadn't had to drain it again, it would eventually have gotten back to that point. It just didn't. With this, especially now with this long desiccation, almost all the aquatic plants that resided in there might be a seed bank left over, but most of it's dead.
Okay, so that's why we didn't have the growth back a second.
Right, and I think you're going to be surprised. The vegetation that's on the lake bed now, you're going to be surprised how long that takes to go away. It actually takes quite a long time for that to rot and disappear. That's going to prevent you from getting almost any weed growth for quite a long time. So that's going to hold it back for a while, but eventually you're going to get, and that might be part of the habitat project with Ben Page, is reintroducing native plants to try and keep the invasive plants from taking hold first, because Eurasian water milfoil is obviously not a native plant. So we would like things, broadleaf pondweeds, things in the Podmageton genus that are native. If you go up to Canada Lake, a lot of those are native plants that are really, they're better fish habitat because the fish evolved around those type of plants.
When I first moved there about 1984, I built my house out on Tamarack.
Okay.
And the lake had lily pads all over. Not a whole lot of weeds, a whole lot of real nice lily pads.
Sure.
The bass were unbelievable.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I have a couple mounted in my house that are just awesome.
So that, as Tim mentioned, you know, I didn't mention that in the presentation about Eurasian milfoil. We talked about hydrilla a lot because that's the big topic right now. But again, Ben is going to be here, and that's something that Brian touched a little bit on it, but there's a plan to try to maintain the native vegetation that's in there. And we want to do that early on. This would be the time of when we want to start establishing that. Now, I think they're going to start with some test plots. We've heard some stories about whether this works and it doesn't work, but we certainly want to give it a try and see what we can do. Tim said, more native plants in there, you're not going to have these other plants that take off, these invasives, right? Not just plants, but fish and all that. So
it's really important at this point you have a blank slate. And before things start to get set, it's really important to keep them managed. I think I had one of my slides that it's a lot easier to either prevent or catch an infestation early than it is to go back in after it's already been established. So once it gets to the point that you described, it gets to be an expensive proposition. Now you've got a seed bank and now you're trying to deal with it. You want to make sure that as those things are coming in, Eurasian water milfoil, like common carp, are in most of our, I think Lake Pleasant's the only lake in the northwest region here that doesn't have Eurasian water milfoil at this point. Doesn't mean that we should let it back in. So managing those species that are undesirable for habitat, and then encouraging some of the species that Tim had mentioned, those largely pondweeds, having that diversity. Think of good habitat versus poor habitat. Good habitat's going to be those native plants that have good spaces and edges versus the stuff that ends up like a shag carpet.
I used to fish up in Canada quite a bit. And on the lakes up there, a lot of them, they have pictures on the lakes. They're on boards. They're actually, so they don't, not paper, they stay there. And they have pictures of the stuff that you should look for to report.
Right.
And I'm just throwing that out there as something that would really be, because I know when I was younger, I used to spend hours and hours out there. Especially in the spring when that water's clear. So I mean, maybe it's something that maybe you would think about.
It is. It's, most people look at aquatic plants and they all look the same to them. A plant's a plant, and it really isn't.
At milfoil, you can tell that pretty good though. It's just like in Europe. There's weed. I don't know what the name of them are when I fish up, and I fish a lot of muskies up in Canada. And there's a plant up there that we call muskie because if you get around it, boy, there's muskies in it.
Exactly.
So I mean, I just thought that.
And I do actually have some plant ID charts. I don't have them out, but if you want one before you leave, let me know and I can get you one.
Keep in mind in the commission, we also, when we talk about algae and plants and things, and stuff getting out of control, there's several different ways of how we can control that. Conneaut Lake, we have a weed harvester in there to kind of control that one. There are certain impoundments in the Fish Commission that we own, that we do drawdowns in the wintertime. Scheduled partial drawdowns, I'll say, just a couple feet or whatever the case may be, let that stuff freeze and let that stuff die off. So when you refill it, that's another way that we can kind of control that. There's certain lakes in the commission that we do that, and sometimes that can be an effective way to do that. I'm not saying that's Tamarack Lake. I'm just saying that there are some options that we can take a look at too when stuff gets out of the way, but while we're still trying to maintain the native vegetation that's in there, you know. So.
Are you not going to draw Tamarack down in the winter?
No, there's no plan to do any of that, no. And I'm a little hesitant, maybe I said that because I don't want that to get out of, you know, there are certain ones that we do that because they're necessity to do that. I'm not saying that's Tamarack Lake in the least. There's no plans to do that.
Makes it harder to ice fish when you guys put it.
So.
There's a gentleman back here that's been raising his hand for a while.
First, thank you very much for being here.
Sure.
My first question, I have two, is are you going to permit electric boat motors like you used to? And the second is, why are you not thinking about northern pipe or piping of it?
I'm not sure if the conditions are actually real suitable for northern pike. Northern pike, like a lot of the lakes that we have them in, are deep and cold and clear, and they kind of like that type of habitat. Give you an example, we have them in Lake Canadota, we have them in Edinburgh Lake, you know, we have them in Lake Pleasant. Those are fairly deep lakes, and they do well in those. For Tamarack Lake, it's a shallow, warms up. I'm not sure if all the habitat is conducive for them as far as water temperatures and things like that. I would say that we have plenty of northern pike lakes. We got a lot of those already. So
Boat motor.
the boat motor, I don't know if I can speak to that too well. I don't have a law enforcement guy here to maybe talk a little bit more about that.
All fish and boat.
They're already electric already anyways.
All fish and boat commission lakes are
Unpowered.
only, so
Yeah.
it'll be
Yeah, we have all unpowered lakes.
Yeah, so it's already going to be that way. That's the way we manage those. So.
Our experience with northern pike is that the larger a northern pike gets, the colder the water it requires to survive. And so what you'll end up probably with is a hammer handle lake.
Right.
Because the young ones can take the 75, 80 degree water, the big ones can't. So they'll reproduce enough to have a lot of little hammer handles, but you'll never get anything over really 30 inches. We have like Lake Gardner, occasionally when we get an extremely warm summer, the big pike float to the surface and die. And so they do reproduce, they do stay there on their own, but you'll probably never get a trophy fishery. The muskie is a warm water fish, and so they're more suited to the warmer water temperatures in Tamarack Lake.
And the last thing we want is to have them in there and then we don't have anything over 24 inches, you know, and it's like, well, we have them in here and now there's no big guys, you know, it's like, we know kind of where they fit best and where they don't fit, so.
Thanks, Sue.
Being a member of the Friends of Tamarack, and also being right there on the lake, I was wondering, I mean, I appreciate everything you've done, but I was wondering, is there something we can do prior to filling the lake? Like when you drain that one end, can we help remove those fish? What can we do? Like, how can we help you?
Well, first of all, we need to know what's going to happen down at that end, and we don't have all the answers to that until we start actually draining it down. We have staff to kind of address that at this time if we need to get in there and do something like that. But I don't know about volunteers and things like that.
We've had volunteers in the past. I think there is some sort of a waiver that we request you sign, but I'd have to look into that a little more because it's been quite some time since we've had people actually volunteer to do it. So.
Well, and we can still clean up, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much things you guys can do that, you know, to help with that. Not saying you can't do that, I'm just saying, you know, there's other things to do as well, too. Sure, go ahead.
What's the progress on the dry hydrants? Maybe Jill knows more, I don't know.
You have your agreement in place, right, with dry hydrants. It's just a matter of you constructing them.
I didn't know going to do it.
Yeah, we have, the town, and maybe even Donnie Bogard, who's the supervisor with West State One Fire Department, also a supervisor for the township. Donnie, do you want to address that? I think.
What was the question?
About the dry hydrant? If not, I can maybe.
What do you want to know about it?
Are they still going to do it, follow through to it?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
That's what
the
I need
Springs
to
Road
know.
in, the Springs Road access there.
Is that where we're gonna be?
Yes.
Not at the other end? Not at both ends?
The other end is in
East Mead.
East
Mead.
Fairfield.
East Fairfield.
Okay. Because I have talked to the carpenter fire department, but in the east and west,
I don't know if they have plans to put them out there.
maybe not. Okay.
I have 3 little grandkids, and I just want to know when can I get them, not even to fish, but I just get them out of the boat, put around with the electric motor. Is there a certain depth that has to be before we'll be able to do that, or you have any idea on that?
I would have to check the actual depth, but we usually make an announcement that it's safe for boating again. We usually let it get up to about the bottom of the launch ramps. I don't know what depth that is or how long it is, but yeah, it'll be open before it actually hits the top. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Absolute normal pool.
Sure.
The fish guy.
Okay.
Just from your experience with other lakes and stuff, I know there's a lot of variables here.
Sure.
About how many years do you feel it'll be before we can harvest out of that lake? Roughly.
I'd say about 4 to 6 years around there. Yeah, and that's really conservative. You know, it's just going to take time for them to build and all that. But
right, I understand all that.
I would say 4 to 6 years. You know, for that really to balance out. And I think, like you said, you understand that. So it's hard to predict. But you know, in Tamarack Lake, we got a lot of things going for it. You know, it's a lot of fertility water, a lot of good growth rates. So I would say if you're comparing Tamarack Lake to maybe a newly refilled lake, but the water, you know, you have issues with infertile water and things like that. It may be longer for that one, and Tamarack would be sooner than that. But we try to get away from time frames and all that because we're not exactly sure on that. But you'll be the first to know.
Well, I grew up on that lake, and when I was like 12,
Sure.
I started fishing, riding my bike there. And my daughter, she was born in '98.
Okay.
Lake was drained in what, 99?
99, yeah.
I got 4 children.
Yeah, it's been drained ever since.
I was just
So,
wondering if he'd be
yeah,
able to fish
sure.
there, but probably
Yeah.
not.
Right. And we know that's a concern of the anglers, and again, we appreciate being patient through that. And but as soon as we release that off there, you know, the lake is going to be set, and you're going to enjoy that for generations with your kids and all that. So that's the important part of that.
Right.
And again, we'll make an announcement about that when that happens. So.
Hey, I appreciate
You know what I mean?
guys doing it right.
I'd love to give you an answer, and then you're like, you know, mark it on the calendar, and then I'd be
I'm
held
just
accountable
curious
for
about
that.
it.
So sure.
4 years from today.
Yeah, exactly.
If you were showing the fish there in 2 years at like 7 inches,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty quick turnaround.
Sure. But keep in mind, we only have bass. A lot of those only have bass and bluegill as they're being stocked. We have a bunch of other species to put in there too, and we want to allow them to get to that size so harvest can be for everything we're stocking in there and maintaining. So that's why you have a little bit of delay in that.
Do you have an idea about how much bait fish you're going to put in that lake?
We have, when we do a stocking in the lake, it's based on the surface acre of the lake. So 560 acres. So if we have a certain number of what our fish per acre is. So yes, on the minnows we have numbers for that are appropriate for the lake, and they vary between the species. So and I have a list of kind of it's not going to mean a lot to you. It's basically just going to.
And I know how to handle it.
And keep in mind, a lot of the data that I share in that is stuff that we read through the literature. This is institutional knowledge of what we've done in the past, what works, what hasn't worked. You know, a lot of the stuff is farm pond management. And a lot of the stuff comes from that as well too. These stocking rates and stuff of what agencies have developed, and they're kind of brought off of that for people like us who want to have a little pond and what to put in there.
That's why I wanted to ask you about the bait fish, because when I stock my pond with the bait fish every year, you know, I make sure we put like 30 pounds in on an acre or whatever we're going to do.
Yeah.
So we have the feeding of the bigger fish.
Sure. Yeah, and there's standard rates out there for the various species, and that we kind of follow that pattern.
See, you're putting fish in every year. We're hoping to put in fish once or twice, adult, spot fin, spot tail, blunt nose minnows, and have them take off and reproduce, and us not have to stock bait fish again. It's A lot of it is timing dependent when they have water in the lake, because certain species are only available at certain times of the year for us. But we've had a lot of success moving spot-tail shiners, golden shiners, blunt-nosed minnows. So we'll actually, him and I will actually be the ones collecting those fish out of Pymatooning. And so we probably can't catch enough to do the maximum stocking rate, so we put in everything we can get. We catch it, we bring it into the hatchery, it's sent down to testing at our fish pathology unit. Once they're cleared, we start distributing them around the lakes. We've been successful with Glade Run and some of our others that require bait fish. And we got the bait fish in first, the bass in second. We had phenomenal survival of our stocked bass after we had some food in them, for them to eat. So
if you stock them not just at the boat dock area, if you can get out into the lake ways,
well,
it would help.
The bait fish we're stocking, we're doing a variety, so they use different habitat types. The spot tail shiners are more of an open water bait fish, so as soon as we put those in the water, they're going to head out to the deepest part of the lake and kind of be more of a schooling fish. Whereas the blunt-nosed minnows are a bottom fish. They'll be hanging out. You'll see them in the weeds within 6 inches of water. That's where they prefer. So putting them right there is right where they're going to live year round.
Then my thing is, if you can get them spread out throughout the lake.
Oh, like you said, there's 6 boat ramps along the one side. We're probably going to stop. We can't. It's not cost effective. I mean, we put them in the boat ramp.
I'll bring a boat down, and you just put the tanks and we'll take them across. You netted them from that far side, why can't you put them back over there?
Well, if you want to be there to distribute them, we do that with other species, we'll be more than happy to pass them off to you.
I sure will.
Put them on the other side.
I sure will. Just let me know.
Give us your contact information.
I'll give you my card tonight.
Right.
Let us know, and we'll stay in contact. Sure. We're always looking for people to volunteer for stuff like that. We keep within reason. There you go.
We're getting them up away from the bridges and stuff.
Sure.
So people can get up and fish away from the bridges.
Sure.
And the trout creeks are getting more population because of it.
Melissa, you might have the last word.
One thing. So this is an area I don't know that much about, is Unfish, so we need you guys in our group. So sign up if you can. With emails, I try to send out updates if you want to join us, if you want to, looking for some people that know a little more about this part of it to kind of help us continue. So
you know more than anybody else here.
How about the fish? I know a lot about them.
The last time when they refilled it, they restocked it, they left everything right to the boat docks, and that's where everybody fished. You need the opportunity to fill up the whole lake again to make it, to get the fish back on that east side, away from the population. A lot of people don't go over there, a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And if there's no fish taken over there, it's going to take that much longer to get over there.
Sure. I got about 7:10 here. Maybe one more question. We go with that. We can let everybody get going here tonight.
How are you going to eradicate the fish in there right now?
Well, it's going to involve some dewatering first. We're going to need to dewater as much as we can out of there, hopefully down to a trickle where we don't have any fish left in there. There's various reports if there's fish in there or not.
Oh, there is.
Yeah, local landowners have mentioned that. So we have, we've got nets, we've got some other gear types that we can get in there to force the fish down to that area and try to get them out. No, we don't. We don't do that. We don't. Rope known is one of the things that has been, that can be used to eliminate fish, but we don't have an applicator to do that type of stuff. It's you got to be careful what you're doing with that, and we don't do that. That's not part of what we do.
Because when they built the lake the first time, they poisoned every little pool.
I read that.
Big pools in there like that.
Yeah, it's an effective method to do that, but we don't do that. And I brought it up, and we don't do that. So we're going to do everything we can. I think our method of what we're going to do, we're going to make sure and try to get us, if they're still there, is to get them out.
Because there is carp.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to address that. Whatever means, ways, whatever we can do to do that, and not to have a refill before that happens. So.
Are the trees? I say thank you very much.
They probably will. Some of them will get flooded and all that.